90.7 KPFK, Los Angeles.
The following radio program has been approved for broadcast by the Federal Communications Commission and is in compliance with all community standards.
From Los Angeles,
Cary Harrison.
Russia, if you're listening.
Talk show, random, political, outrageous, philosophical, analytical, passionate, sunsets, roadkill cooking tips, open-minded, swordsman, bent, resolute, chocolate, bushwhacker, belt buckles, investigative, companion, fearless. Call in. Piercing the cloud of mainstream entertainment. It's the Cary Harrison Files.
It is the Cary Harrison Files. Welcome. More fun today as we continue doing the real history. All this a metaphor for what's happening today, for what you're going through. We're also live streaming right now on Substack and YouTube, LinkedIn, anything with a chip and a signal. Well, maybe there's chicks there too. You never know. You can simply Google Cary Harrison, C-A-R-Y, Substack or Cary Harrison YouTube, and that way we can stay connected when you arrive at your destination. Don't forget to sign up for our newsletter at caryharrison.com. There you're going to get a transcript of this entire show. Plus, I throw in clips and stuff that we simply cannot do on the radio anymore. And that's our newsletter at caryharrison.com. So I'm going to continue here. We'll probably open up the phones a little bit later. But I just want to let you know why I am writing this book that I'm sharing with you. Real time. It's like doing an audiobook, except audiobooks you take, 3-4 weeks to record and then micro edit every breath. So I'm just doing real time performance for you because you and I are in this together. I'm writing this book. I'm calling it the MAGA history of the United States. And I'm performing these segments for you live on the radio because history has been lying to you politely. Today, it is, for sure. It's not even history. It's like real time. Not the loud lies, the obvious ones with flags and trumpets and marching bands. Those are easy. This book is existing because of the respectable lies. The lies whispered by textbooks, laminated by institutions, and repeated by people who insist they're being balanced. The lies that begin with good intentions and end with mass graves and surgical trays and loyalty oaths and cereal boxes and carefully worded apologies delivered decades too late. America doesn't suffer from a lack of ideals. It suffers from overconfidence in them. This is a country that takes one decent idea, liberty, cleanliness, security, morality, progress, and beats it to death with a clipboard over and over again, across centuries, with enthusiasm. Wow, did you hear that? Was it a cannon firing at me? Possibly. So I'm writing this book for you, and I'm writing it to document the habit and laugh at it while it bleeds. If you're looking for a comforting history, turn off the radio now. Turn it off. And definitely don't get my newsletter, and most definitely don't ever look at this book. It may end up being like a comic book. It already feels like it. Maybe I'll make a comic book as well as the written version. If you need heroes preserved in amber or myths wrapped in cellophane or founders described as demigods instead of deeply ambitious men with atrocious blind spots, my ancestors, then you're in the wrong aisle, and I am not here to reassure you. I'm here to tamper with your inheritance and explain how we got to where we are today to help you navigate what seems like an absolutely impossible future. So the following segments, in them I'm going to perform for you live. They're not a history of America's best intentions. It's a history of what those intentions actually did. Now, the Puritans didn't come for freedom. They came for control. The founders didn't abolish hierarchy. They redesigned it. The reformers didn't heal bodies. They disciplined them. The scientists didn't merely observe. They intervened, withheld, poisoned, and documented. The patriots didn't always defend liberty. They audited it. Again and again, authority put on a lab coat, a robe, a uniform, or a flag pin and announced, "This is for your own good." And again, people suffered quietly while someone else took notes. This book that I'm writing, A MAGA History of the United States, I just love that title. It's so not, but it is, so is. It's here to offend very specific people. It's here to offend, hold on, little sound effect. Those who believe cruelty becomes acceptable when wrapped in righteousness. Those who confuse order with virtue and obedience with health. Those who say you have to understand the context when the context is screaming. Those who think intentions matter more than consequences. And those who prefer history sanitized, deodorized, and safe for children, especially when children were the ones experimented on. It's here to offend anyone who believes that discomfort equals morality, that punishment equals progress, or that suffering is tolerable as long as it produces data. It's also here to offend nostalgia. Nostalgia is history's most effective accomplice. It files down the edges, it softens the language, and it tells you that things were, well, they were complicated, which is true, but it's also useless. Lynching was complicated. Eugenics was complicated. Medical experimentation without consent was complicated. Complexity is not a defense. It's a description of how many steps it took to ruin someone's life. What I'm doing is not to pretend neutrality. Neutrality is what allowed most of this to happen. Neutrality is how 40-year experiments run uninterrupted. Neutrality is how witch hunts become policy and policy becomes tradition. Neutrality is a luxury item often purchased by people who were never on the table. Instead, my book here is choosing clarity. It's naming things. It's mocking euphemisms. It's treating power as suspicious by default. It assumes that if someone is very confident about improving humanity, you should check where they keep the knives. You're going to notice a tone. It's intentional. Satire is not decoration here. It's a scalpel. Humor is not a distraction. It's how you cut through reverence without losing your mind. And when history becomes unbearable, laughter is the last ethical tool left. So, if I make you angry, good. Anger means something landed. If it makes you laugh uncomfortably, better. That means recognition. If it makes you defensive, check why. History doesn't need you to protect it. It's already done enough damage on its own. And what I'm doing is not anti-American, by the way. We came over on the Mayflower. We came over later on behalf of the Crown. We helped sign the Declaration of Independence, even authored it. So it's not anti-American. It's anti-delusion. It takes the United States seriously enough to hold it accountable, not an idea, but as a repeat offender. A country capable of astonishing generosity and staggering cruelty, often at the same time. Often in the same sentence. By the end, you're not going to hate America, but you may distrust people who insist they love it uncritically. And that, frankly, is the point. For today, right here, right now, let's enjoy together a MAGA history of the United States. You're listening to the Cary Harrison Files, CaryHarrison.com. I'm sharing with you some segments from the book I'm writing, A MAGA History of the United States. This book contains an unauthorized history, unsupervised satire, graphic depictions of hypocrisy, blasphemy against national myths, improper handling of revered figures, and unlicensed moral clarity. Let's start with what I call, or who I call, the serial killer. And that's spelled Cereal, as in breakfast cereal. Now, we started with the Pilgrims a while ago. We got all the way through the Civil War, the Revolutionary War, and now we're about to jump into the 20th century. But who better to launch us than the great Dr. John Harvey Kellogg? The Serial Killer, or How America Let a Flake-Peddling Puritan Declare War on the Human Body. America has always had a special weakness for lunatics who arrive wearing lab coats, wielding clipboards, and promising cleanliness. Enter Dr. John Harvey Kellogg, physician, health reformer, breakfast tyrant, and the sort of man who looked at the human body and saw original sin with plumbing. This was a man so terrified of lust that he dedicated his life to chasing it with spoons. Kellogg ran the Battle Creek Sanitarium, a health resort for the rich, the anxious, and the chronically guilty. Patients came seeking vitality. Kellogg offered them multiple Fanny enemas, yogurt injections, electrotherapy, and lectures delivered with the warmth of a tax audit. His gospel was simple. If you felt joy in your body, something had gone terribly wrong. Naturally, America listened, because Kellogg spoke fluent authority. He was a doctor. He published papers. He wore white. And most importantly, he wrapped his personal revulsions in the language of hygiene. Sex wasn't sinful, you see. It was unhealthy. Masturbation wasn't normal. It was a disease. Desire wasn't human. It was a mechanical failure. Notice how we're looping right back to the Pilgrims. Same stuff, different century. According to Kellogg, when something malfunctions, you fix it, preferably with medical instruments and sharp blades. Kellogg's obsession with suppressing sexual behavior metastasized into what can only be described as surgical tantrum. Circumcision, he declared, would solve the problem. Yep, all the problems, everything. Circumcision, not as a religious rite, not as a personal choice, but as a preventative moral appliance, like a chastity lock installed by a man who hated doors. And it was done during the time of puberty before the advent of sterilization. So as you can imagine, there was a lot of blood, a lot of pus, scar tissue, and very little desire to ever touch oneself again, even with soap. So as a young man continued to grow, so did the scar tissue of a lousy circumcision turn his prong into a bent banana, a mangled, corkscrewed tragedy that couldn't point straight if its life depended on it. Circumcision, in Kellogg's mind, was not a religious rite or a medical necessity. It was a behavioral deterrent, a punitive firmware update for a body designed to make pleasure inconvenient, joy suspicious, and adolescence feel like a disciplinary hearing. He openly advocated performing it without anesthesia, so the lesson would, quote, stick. Whew. This was not medicine. This was spite with a scalpel, surgery as moral spanking. Kellogg reached for metal. His was not a medical practice so much as a Victorian dungeon masquerading as public health, a place where the human body arrived flawed and left traumatized. For boys and men, he devised what can only be described as genital penitentiaries. Iron chastity cages fitted over the... Hold on. I don't know what I can say anymore. Fitted over the... like a medieval apology. These contraptions were strapped, they were buckled, they were banded into place, engineered to prevent erection, access, or any hint of optimism below the belt. Some featured internal spikes because Kellogg believed the body learned best when pain arrived promptly and without ambiguity. A swelling, in his theology, was not a biological event. It was an insurrection, and insurrections were to be crushed. There were also rings, cold, unyielding metal circles clamped at the base, sometimes studded with spikes designed to act as tripwires for nocturnal treason. The moment the body dared dream, the device bit back. It was behaviorism before Skinner, before Pavlov, and done with a wrench, a feedback loop of shame and steel. The lesson was simple. Arousal equals agony. Learn it or bleed. Children, naturally, were not spared. Kellogg endorsed chastity belts for boys, smaller versions of adult restraints, justified with the calm assurance that childhood curiosity led directly to madness, weakness, and moral collapse. These belts were meant to be worn continuously. Hygiene was incidental. Even though it was all about hygiene, psychological damage was considered a feature. The goal was not health, it was preemption. Girls and women fared no better. Kellogg recommended clitoral shields and restraints, often incorporated into belts or harnesses, because female pleasure, when he acknowledged its existence at all, was viewed as a pathological rumor that needed immediate containment. When devices failed, he escalated with the confidence of a man who had never doubted himself. Acids, cauterizations, surgery. The cages, grotesque as they were presented as the human alternative. And when even iron and leather proved insufficient, Kellogg reached for the knife. Circumcision without anesthesia for boys, clitoridectomy for girls, these were not whispered atrocities. They were published recommendations delivered with the brisk certainty of a man explaining how to remove a wart. The message was unmistakable. If the body refused to behave, it would be corrected by force. I am of that generation, also circumcised, not by choice, didn't get to vote. Nope, just tradition. I don't think my parents knew where it came from. The Battle Creek Sanitarium, Dr. John Harvey Kellogg, the cornflake king, who later created bran flakes, because, as we're told, this was wellness. This was reform. This was the same man who sold America breakfast cereal and preached bowel regularity as a measure of moral purity. The bran flakes were there to flush the demons out. The cages were there to make sure no new ones got in. Kellogg didn't just fear pleasure. He sought to mechanize its extinction, wrapping the human body in locks, spikes, acid, and surgical finality, then calling the result virtue. Really, America's first incel before we even had that word. America didn't just eat his cornflakes. It swallowed the sermon whole and asked for seconds. But Kellogg didn't stop at genitals. Oh, no. He went south. As a devout Seventh-day Adventist, ever heard of Advent hospitals? They come from him. As a devout Seventh-day Adventist, Kellogg believed the body was a battlefield where salvation and sin wrestled daily, often somewhere near the colon. Regular bowel movements were not merely healthy, they were spiritually hygienic. Constipation, in his cosmology, was not a medical inconvenience, but a moral crisis. Fecal retention was practically a demonic lease agreement. I guess he never heard of the guy who gave us the Reformation in 1517, right? The original Martin Luther, who suffered from this particular malady. I mean, the guy lived on pork and meat in the 1500s, but he did not consider himself demonically possessed. But here we are. It's the late 1800s. We're about to move into the 20th century, and this becomes the new thinking for the entire nation. The logic was breathtaking. The more waste you retained, the more corruption festered. The more corruption festered, the more evil had taken up residence. Therefore, pooping was next to godliness. Enter bran flakes. Cornflakes, it turned out, weren't aggressive enough. Desire might still survive on beige despair alone. So Kellogg doubled down, added bran, the industrial sandpaper of cereals. The goal was not flavor. The goal was evacuation. He wanted the intestines scrubbed clean like a nun's pantry before inspection. A righteous colon was an empty one. A full bowel in Kellogg's worldview was basically a demon Airbnb. This was digestion as exorcism, fiber as holy water, the toilet as confessional. And America swallowed it, then expelled it enthusiastically. Because nothing sells like fear when it's laminated with scripture and footnoted with science. Kellogg wrapped his bowel theology in medical jargon, salted it with Protestant guilt, and marketed it as modern health. Parents panicked, doctors nodded, institutions complied. A generation learned that the body was filthy, that pleasure was dangerous, and salvation came through bland food and aggressive elimination. Cold baths, endless enemas, exercises, penance, mechanical interventions that suggested Kellogg viewed the human digestive tract as a hostile nation requiring occupation. His ideal human was sexless, joyless, odorless, and spiritually evacuated, powered entirely by fiber, obedience, and the constant fear of internal corruption. Didn't have robots yet. This was the same era that gave us phrenology. Remember that? The Germans really took that one up a notch, where they measured the size of your skull and could figure out, whatever they wanted to figure out. It's the same era that gave us eugenics and the confident belief that women fainted because their uteruses wandered. Kellogg fit perfectly a man so terrified of desire and decay, he tried to flush both out of the species. He even masturbated rich women to orgasm so they would no longer be hysterical. Declaimed that their wombs would no longer physically wander within their bellies if exhausted at the end of his fingertips. I think you get where I'm going here. This level of hypocrisy was nothing less than exquisite. Womb, by the way, comes from hyster. It's Greek, so hysterectomy. It's just the womb. So hysterical behavior just means your womb has gone nuts, even though we know it's so not true. But he's the guy that convinced everyone that's what it was. Inevitably, his system required locked doors and euphemisms. While Kellogg preached purity, the Battle Creek Sanitarium developed entire protocols for treatments that were intensely sexual, heavily supervised, and drenched in moral denial. Pleasure was forbidden. Sexual relief was medical. Enjoyment was denied, but stimulation, rebranded, regulated, and administered, was suddenly therapy. Repression, once again, did not eliminate desire. It bureaucratized it. When the sanitarium later burned because moral crusades always end in smoke, stories circulated of sealed offices, private cabinets, and a dozen John Harvey Kellogg personal dildi that still have never been found. Whether legend or inventory, the loudest enemy of bodily corruption built an empire that required keys, euphemisms, and secrecy to function. It's always that way, isn't it? So let's be clear. This was never about hygiene. The reason you're circumcised was never about hygiene. It was never about your health. It wasn't even about God. It was about control. Control over bodies, control over urges, control over the terrifying, leaking, unpredictable reality of being human. Kellogg didn't want healthier people. He wanted emptier ones, emptier stomachs, emptier bowels, emptier thoughts. Well, he failed, of course. Desire is not a demon you can flush. You can't starve it with cereal or drown it in bran. You can only traumatize people and call it virtue. But the damage has lingered. Policies became norms. Norms became traditions. Traditions became unquestioned rituals performed long after the original panic had passed, leaving behind only habit, inertia, and breakfast aisles full of judgment. John Harvey Kellogg died convinced he was purifying humanity. History, less polite and far more accurate, records him as a man who mistook repression for righteousness and turned digestion into doctrine. The cornflakes survived. The brand survived. The guilt survived. The demons apparently did not. And America learned yet again that when fear teams up with authority, it doesn't need evidence, just a straight face, a sharp instrument, a bowl of cereal, and a nation willing to confuse discomfort with virtue. You're listening to the Cary Harrison Files, live streaming right now on everything. YouTube, Substack. Simply Google Cary Harrison Substack, Cary Harrison YouTube, LinkedIn, wherever you want to go. You can watch the live stream. So when you get out of your car while listening to the radio, you can switch over to your mobile device and continue on. You could also go to caryharrison.com, and there you're going to get our newsletter where I'm going to be able to put an entire transcript of this in there, plus the incredible illustrations. I have to say, wow. Well, of course I'm going to say that. I'm not going to say they suck. They really are great. I'm sharing with you some segments from the book I'm writing, A MAGA History of the United States, a book containing unauthorized history and unsupervised satire, graphic depictions of hypocrisy, blasphemy against national myths, improper handling of revered figures, unlicensed moral clarity. So listening to this show or reading to this transcript is not approved by wellness gurus, congressional committees, or anyone who believes discomfort equals virtue. You listen and read at your own risk. We're going to pause right now. When we return on the other side, here on the Cary Harrison Files, we're going to jump right into World War I, World War II. Who is behind it? What was going on? And does it feel like today just a little bit? But you're going to get the part, like all the rest of it, not taught to you in school, not taught to you in history class, but oughta. And there's a reason they don't, and we're going to find out why in just a sec.
This pussy grabs back. The Cary Harrison Files. CaryHarrison.com.
Listen, well, it's still legal.
The Cary Harrison Files. CaryHarrison.com.
And it is the Cary Harrison Files, CaryHarrison.com. Don't forget to get our newsletter at CaryHarrison.com. And enjoy the transcript I'm going to send along with the incredible illustrations. As I continue to write this thing, my muse is infesting me. She's stinging me like a horrible bee, just buzzing, and I'm writing and going crazy. And finally, it's been 2 years. I've been just constipated. Couldn't do it. I can write monologues for the show every week. I mean, I love that. But all these stories actually need to be told, what's not in our history books, and have a little fun with it while we're at it. Okay. This is my chapter 14. I'm sure I'm going to renumber all of this stuff because I keep adding stuff in. But we'll just pretend it's chapter 14, World War I. The Great War, or how... Oh, did I mention live streaming? I think I did. Maybe I didn't. Live streaming right now. Simply Google Cary, or don't Google ChatGPT. I don't care. Cary Harrison YouTube or Substack or LinkedIn or whatever, and you can watch the live stream of this and see some of these illustrations. So World War I, the Great War, or how Europe committed suicide over a seating chart. Millions died because everyone had alliances, mustaches, and terrible conflict resolution skills. By 1914, Europe was a tinderbox soaked in kerosene, stacked with explosives and supervised by men who thought honor was stored in cavalry uniforms. Every empire was armed to the teeth, deeply insecure, and absolutely convinced that someone else was about to start something. All it needed was a spark. Enter Gavrilo Princip, a malnourished nationalist with a pistol and a lunch schedule. He assassinated Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo after a series of bungled attempts that suggested fate itself was drunk. One dead Archduke later, Europe looked at the smoking gun and collectively said, excellent excuse. And just like that, poof, a regional mess turned into a planetary bloodbath, thanks to a dazzling web of alliances no one fully understood, but everyone felt legally obligated to honor. Austria-Hungary threatened Serbia. Russia threatened Austria-Hungary. Germany threatened Russia. France threatened Germany. Britain threatened everyone who looked at Belgium funny. Diplomacy collapsed faster than a Jenga tower built by men in monocles. Thus began World War I, also known as let's solve the 20th century with 19th century thinking and industrial scale murder. The generals, God bless their starched uniforms, expected a short, glorious war. You know, some marching, some charging, maybe a decisive battle or two, home by Christmas. Hence the song. One of them, I'll be home for Christmas. Yeah. What they got instead was trench warfare, a system so stupidly cruel, it feels like a practical joke played on an entire generation. Picture this. Millions of men living in muddy ditches, surrounded by rats, surrounded by lice, surrounded by rotting corpses and the lingering stench of fear and human waste. They charged machine guns with bayonets because honor demanded it. Machine guns, meanwhile, did not care about honor. They cared about efficiency. Artillery pulverized landscapes into moonscapes. Gas attacks turned lungs into soup. Shell shock, what we now call PTSD, was treated as cowardice. Soldiers were shot for refusing to climb out of trenches and die politely. This was progress. Technology, faster than morality could keep up. Tanks were introduced, mostly to break down. Planes took to the skies, initially to wave at each other, then to shoot each other down. Submarines turned the oceans into floating death traps. Poison gas was deployed, well, because apparently the Hague Conventions were more suggestions than rules. Feel familiar today? Meanwhile, civilians were drafted into starvation, rationing, propaganda, and grief. Empires cracked under the strain. The Ottoman Empire disintegrated. Austria-Hungary collapsed like a badly assembled IKEA table. Russia imploded into revolution because nothing cures a monarchy like sending peasants to die for a czar who won't stop reading French novels. America watched from across the Atlantic, sipping neutrality and selling weapons until German submarines started sinking ships and sending threatening telegrams that read like drunk text to Mexico. And I'm going to cough. You won't have to hear it. In 1917, the U.S. joined a war, bringing fresh troops, bringing my grandfather, by the way, fresh money and fresh optimism to a conflict already drowning in corpses. The war ended in 1918, not with victory so much as exhaustion. Everyone was broke. Everyone was traumatized. An entire generation had been fed into the industrial meat grinder and turned into memorial statues. Then came the Treaty of Versailles, a document so vindictive it practically begged for a sequel. Germany was humiliated, saddled with impossible reparations, stripped of territory and blamed for everything short of original sin. The treaty didn't end the conflict, it scheduled it. World War I was sold as the war to end all wars, which is history's most aggressively incorrect slogan. It killed empires, it rewired borders, it radicalized politics, and left enough unresolved bitterness to fuel the next catastrophe with interest. Millions died. Millions more were maimed. And for what? To prove that nationalism is a hell of a drug, that alliances are just group chats with artillery, and that when men in power mistake pride for destiny, the bill is always paid in blood. Europe survived barely, the world staggered forward, and history sharpened its knife for round two. Sip of coffee. My Breville machine. Mwah, mwah. That would be my mechanical lover. Yeah, my cyborg coffee machine. Cary Harrison with you. This is the Cary Harrison Files, live streaming right now on everything with a chip and a signal so that you can see the incredible illustrations as I live perform the book that I'm writing for you. Normally, as I think I said a long time earlier, when you do a audiobook, it takes 3-4 weeks, do 1,000 takes of every line, edit it down, edit out the breaths, blah, 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 blah. But you deserve the live performance because it's fun for me, it's fun for you, and we get to share this part of history we are not taught in school, conspicuously plucked from the textbooks. So now let's just jump into chapter 15, likely to be renumbered, renamed, but World War II, the sequel nobody asked for, but everyone paid for. Or how humanity looked at the rubble of World War I and said, let's add genocide, air conditioning for tanks, and a doomsday button. World War II didn't arrive as a surprise. It arrived like a drunk who'd been loudly promising to come back all evening and then did, with friends, with weapons, and unresolved childhood trauma. The first war had ended in a farce masquerading as justice. The Treaty of Versailles wasn't peace, it was a receipt. Germany was humiliated, bankrupt. Hold on. A lot of stuff in the air today, but I'm thoughtful that way and hit the cough button so you don't have to experience and enjoy the sound of my exhalations blasting into the microphone. Like I said, Germany was humiliated. It was bankrupt. It was publicly blamed for everything short of the Black Plague. Its economy collapsed. Its pride curdled. Its population simmered in resentment while the victors congratulated themselves for stability. And then into this fertile swamp slithered Adolf Hitler, failed painter, successful hate influencer, and walking indictment of art school admissions committees. He took national humiliation, economic misery, and centuries-old anti-Semitism, blended them into a toxic smoothie, and sold it as destiny. Millions lined up for seconds because nothing unites people faster than promising greatness and blaming minorities for their misery and other countries with fewer weapons. Wow, sounds oddly like today. Many would say it sounds oddly like today. Germany rearmed openly. Europe watched nervously. Britain and France responded with appeasement, which is diplomacy's equivalent of pretending the house isn't on fire because the flames haven't reached the sofa yet. Austria disappeared. Poof. Czechoslovakia was carved up politely like hors d'oeuvres at a summit. Everyone nodded, everyone lied, everyone hoped the monster would be satisfied. And he wasn't. In 1939, Germany invaded Poland and introduced the world to blitzkrieg, war but faster, war but louder, war with absolutely no regard for civilians. Tanks rolled, cities burned, the old rules died screaming. France collapsed so quickly it barely had time to surrender properly. Britain clung to survival by sheer spite, powered by tea, radar, Churchill speeches that sounded like defiant growls translated into English. Uh-oh, hold on. Well, this is why we love air pollution. It's just makes it so much better. Meanwhile, Japan, watching Europe implode, decided it was a perfect time to build an empire through mass slaughter. China burned. Civilians became targets. Rape, famine, and biological experiments became policy. The Pacific turned into a floating graveyard. If you're just joining us right now, you're listening to the Cary Harrison Files, CaryHarrison.com. And I'm sharing with you some segments from the book I'm writing, A MAGA History of the United States, containing unauthorized history, unsupervised satire, depictions of hypocrisy, blasphemy against national myths, and the improper handling of revered figures. Unlicensed moral clarity. Listen and read at your own risk. And I'm doing the heavy lifting that was not done in the schools that I went to. I went to great schools, but this stuff was not included. And this is the why of the what that I am living through today, that you are living through today. Where did this come from? How did it become a tradition? The United States, meanwhile, this is World War II, sat on the sidelines like a wealthy neighbor watching a block burn down. The United States selling weapons, collecting checks, and insisting it was very concerned. This moral posture lasted until December 7th of 1941, a whole lot of years later, when Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, forcing America to drop the pretense and pick up the war with industrial enthusiasm. What followed was total war, a phrase that means nothing is sacred and everyone pays. Factories became temples to death. Science clocked in. Cities were flattened from the air. Civilians learned that modern war doesn't care where you live. It doesn't care where you sleep, and it doesn't care where you hide your children. And then there was the Holocaust. 6 million Jews murdered, gypsies, disabled people, queer people, dissidents, Slavs, millions more erased. Not in a frenzy, but methodically, bureaucratically, with paperwork. The greatest horror of World War II wasn't just the brutality, it was the efficiency. Evil, organized, genocide, optimized. The Allies eventually clawed their way back. Stalingrad turned Germany inside out. Normandy tore open Europe's western door. The Pacific Island hopping campaign ground soldiers into coral dust. Victory came inch by inch, soaked in blood, trauma, and the quiet realization that no one was coming out clean. Then to cap it all off, humanity invented a new way to end arguments. The atomic bomb. Hiroshima, Nagasaki. The war ended instantly, and the world entered an age where annihilation could be delivered in a lunch break. Germany was flattened. Japan surrendered. Europe flattened and in ruins. Tens of millions were dead. Survivors stared at the wreckage and said, "Never again, never," which history immediately bookmarked as a lie. World War II rearranged the planet. Empires collapsed, superpowers emerged, the Cold War began warming up. The United Nations was born, armed with lofty ideals and very little enforcement power. Humanity gained both moral clarity and the means to obliterate itself, now in mere seconds. World War II proved 3 things beyond dispute. Evil doesn't always wear a snarl. It often wears a uniform and smiles. Progress without ethics is just efficiency with a body count. And when civilization fails, it fails spectacularly. The war was won. The peace was complicated, and history once again started sharpening its knife. Cary Harrison with you. This is the Cary Harrison Files. Don't forget, we are live streaming right now. You can Google, search, whatever you want to do. Cary Harrison Substack, Cary Harrison YouTube, or anything with a chip and a signal. You'll see the live video plus the awesome illustrations. And you'll be able to listen to us if you drive to wherever you're headed to. Get out of your car, you can switch over to your phone and continue on right there. Don't forget to get my newsletter at caryharrison.com. There, I'm going to put this entire transcript, including the images and all the rest of it, because this is the school you and I never got. We're going to jump right now into Operation Paperclip. Some of you have heard of it. Some of you have not. Was it taught to you in school? No. Is it being taught to you now? Yes. Operation Paperclip, or how America beat the Nazis, then hired them and put them on the payroll. What? After World War II, America stood atop the rubble of Europe, chest puffed, halo polished, flag unfurled, and immediately asked a very practical question. So, about those Nazis, are any of them useful? Thus was born Operation Paperclip, a program whose name sounded like office supplies, but functioned like a moral lobotomy. The premise was simple. It was elegant. It was profoundly American. Yes, they worked for a genocidal regime, but have you seen their resumes? The war had ended, the ovens were cooling, the mass graves were still warm, and Washington, peering nervously at Moscow, decided that ethics were a luxury item best stored in the attic next to ration books and shame. The Cold War had begun, and suddenly the worst people in Europe were being rebranded as assets. Not criminals, not accomplices, not men who'd enthusiastically welded science to slaughter. Assets. America didn't just pardon them, it airlifted them, scrubbed their files, erased their affiliations, and handed them new suits like a halftime costume change. SS officers became engineers, literally. Party members became consultants. Men who'd previously worked under a banner featuring a skull now worked under one featuring an eagle. And everyone agreed not to ask too many questions, because questions slow things down. Wernher von Braun, the poster boy of this ethical gangbang, had built rockets for Hitler using slave labor harvested like spare parts from concentration camps. His V-2 rockets didn't just fly, they burrowed into London streets and human bodies alike. Thousands died so his equations could get tighter. America looked at this resume and said, essentially, well, nobody's perfect. So von Braun was brought to the United States, where he was laundered, he was deodorized, he eventually transformed into a charming TV science uncle explaining space travel to children. Children whose parents were never told to ask how many corpses it took to get to the moon. The process was meticulous. Nazi affiliations were redacted. Atrocities were downgraded to, quote, administrative involvement. If a man had designed a torture device, he became a biomedical specialist. If he'd overseen forced labor, he was now a logistics expert. Genocide apparently had just bad branding. This was not denazification. This was corporate onboarding. The official justification was national security. The unofficial one was panic. The Soviets were advancing. Communism was scary. And nothing terrifies America more than the possibility that someone else might get the smart bastards first. So the United States imported Nazis the way a desperate startup imports engineers. Fast, quietly, and with a strict don't ask, don't Google policy. These men weren't hidden in basements. They worked openly at NASA, at military labs, at research facilities. They shaped missiles, medicine, aerospace, and doctrine. They lectured. They mentored. They were praised for their brilliance, their discipline, their efficiency, their famously neutral German virtues that had just powered an industrial killing spree. And the country told itself a soothing bedtime story. They're not Nazis anymore. They're Americans now. As if citizenship were a baptism that washed off blood. This wasn't pragmatism. This was moral money laundering. A nation that had just declared fascism the ultimate evil decided it was perfectly acceptable as long as it came with schematics and a clearance badge. The irony was obscene. While Jewish refugees were still being turned away or treated like administrative inconveniences, the men who helped murder their families were being handed pensions and suburban homes. Victims got trauma, perpetrators got careers. But don't worry, it was all for freedom. Operation Paperclip revealed something essential about American ethics. They're conditional, adjustable, elastic as a rubber glove. We don't abandon principles, we lease them with an option to buy back later once the panic subsides. And when the panic does subside, we rewrite the story. We make movies about triumph. We put rockets in museums. We let the architects of terror die quietly in bed, decorated, respected, and carefully disconnected from their past. History textbooks call this strategic necessity. And that's kind of adorable, isn't it? It was a deal with the devil, except the devil showed up in a lab coat, spoke excellent English, and promised to beat the Russians to orbit. America didn't just shake his hand. It offered dental, a research budget, and a flag pin. Operation Paperclip didn't corrupt American values. It clarified them. And when faced with a choice between justice and advantage, America chose advantage and then congratulated itself for being mature about it. Because nothing says moral leadership like importing war criminals, rebranding them as geniuses, and letting them explain rockets to school children. We beat the Nazis, then we hired them. Then we asked them to help us save the world. And that, in its own up way, is the most American story imaginable. Cary Harrison with you. As we round this out, it is the Cary Harrison Files. We are enjoying some segments together. I'm just doing a live performance of the book I'm writing, A MAGA History of the United States, Unauthorized History, Unsupervised Satire, Hypocrisy, Blasphemy Against National Myths, all the good, clean stuff that we were not taught in school. I will point out once again, one of my ancestors was Abraham Lincoln. My ancestors signed the Declaration of Independence. We came over in 1620 on the Mayflower, wrote the Declaration of Independence. Maybe I just said that, Department of Redundancy Department. So this is kind of personal to me, and I'm not afraid to share this history with you. And for many of us, it's first. For some of us, we've heard this before, or at least parts of it. We're going to finish up today with Project MK Ultra. No, I think we're going to save that. Yeah, we're going to do MK Ultra, which is one of our favorites, and then we'll finish with McCarthyism, because that's where we all are now. Project MK Ultra, or Uncle Sam drops acid, pees on consent, and calls it science. If Operation Paperclip was America hiring Nazis because the resume font was nice, Project MK Ultra was America staring straight into the mirror, shrugging, and deciding to experiment on its own brain. The Cold War didn't just produce missiles and spies. It produced panic with a lab coat. Washington became convinced that the communists had cracked the ultimate weapon: mind control, hypnosis, brainwashing, psychic communism, you name it. Somewhere, a Soviet apparatchik was allegedly turning Boy Scouts into Marxist sleeper agents using vibes. America responded the only way it knows how, by throwing money at lunacy and telling the lawyers to take the week off. Thus, MK Ultra, A CIA program so deranged, it sounds like it was named by a coke-addled comic book villain. The mission? Control the human mind. The method? Do whatever the hell you want and never write down the part where it gets weird. Spoiler, it got weird immediately. The CIA's working theory was that the human psyche was basically a faulty radio. You just had to twiddle the knobs hard enough, throw in some LSD, some mescaline, barbiturates, amphetamines, hypnosis, sleep deprivation, sensory overload, sensory deprivation, electroshock, psychological waterboarding. If it rattled the skull or liquefied the ego, it went on the clipboard. Consent was considered optional. Ethics were considered subversive. Prisoners, mental patients, sex workers, soldiers, college students, random citizens who thought they were getting a free drink and instead got a face full of hallucinogens, courtesy of Uncle Sam. The CIA ran brothels. This is true. I mean, the CIA ran brothels, actual tax-funded shacks where men were dosed with LSD while agents watched from behind one-way mirrors like perverted zoologists studying the mating habits of lab rats. This wasn't research. This was psychedelic vandalism. People were slipped acid the way bartenders slip limes. Some lost their minds. Some lost their jobs. Some lost their lives. One scientist was dosed without his knowledge, spiraled into terror, and later jumped out a window. The agency shrugged, stamped confidential on the paperwork, and went back to melting brains. Because national security and floating through this chemical carnival was America's other favorite flavor of mid-century madness, radiation optimism. The atomic age convinced the country that invisible forces were not just safe, but cool. Atoms, rays, progress. Somewhere between duck and cover drills and fallout shelters, the government decided it would be educational to see what happens when radiation met human bodies, preferably poor ones. Cue the dietary experiments, the medical trials, the nutritional studies that treated breakfast like a delivery system for existential dread. Children were fed enriched cereals and grains, fortified not just with vitamins, but with the era's boundless faith in glowing science. Call it radioactive cornflakes if you like. It captures the spirit. Breakfast as beta test, the food pyramid as a hazard sign. Was it literally a CIA branded box with a Geiger counter prize inside? No. Was it a time when Americans were fed substances they didn't understand by authorities who didn't ask permission? Absolutely. MK Ultra lived it. Okay, I'm going to stop here because, boy, the clock has tipped fast. But we will pick it up there. Let me just thank you. Thank you for joining me. I have not felt this kind of happiness. I know it's a little dark, but we talk about this during the call-in portions. We talk randomly here and there, but to actually put it together so there's a whole timeline of history in a digestible way, I don't know, it just turns me on wildly. And to be able to share that with you it's an honor. I want to thank the great Renee Yawarski, who is our technical director and producer Tricks. She is awesome. The great Will in the KPFK control room. Thank you so much, my friend. And I want to thank you, mostly you, because you and me, we're the same. You're the listener, I'm the listener, you're the talker, I'm the talker, and together we do this together, and then we can share this everywhere as it expands, goes to people all over the world who want this information. So we're going to, as I continue more and get near the end of it, I'll let you know more. Okay? So let me just thank you once again and let you know that I will see you next week. And you can get the newsletter at caryharrison.com, CARY. And there, I'm going to put a transcript of this entire broadcast today so that you can read it and look at the fantastic illustrations. And I don't say that because they came out of here, but they actually are. And like, I'm blown away by that too. And there's the muse once again. So just know you're loved, you're taken care of. Somebody's got your back here. I know you've got mine, and I look forward totally to seeing you next week.
Smells like fish. Tastes like chocolate.
It's the Cary Harrison Files. CaryHarrison.com.